Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Chris Leiter, the designer, founder of Sand Pack Company. Thanks for joining me. It's good to see you. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I know we should have recorded our previous hour of talking, but
Yeah.
we've already been going at it for about an hour here, just talking about the history of the outdoor industry. That's how we got connected, and I'm glad that I'm trying to retrace our steps. Did you just find the outdoor archive on Instagram? Was that how?
I did. I found the outdoor archive on Instagram, and then I think I hit you guys up, and you said something about the Highlander podcast. So, and we were talking about going through all those episodes and kind of been learning about everything you guys do at the university, and it's been an awesome trip for the last month, kind of going down the history lane there.
Yeah, so we'll this will be part of our history of gear series, because you're a student of the industry and of the history of the industry, but I think you're telling a really interesting story through your company Sand and what you're doing to take some of the history of these companies, these products, and giving them a new life and introducing people to some of these companies, is really interesting, and I think is kind of a new spin on what we've been doing with the series. Like, we've largely talked with historians of the outdoor industry about the past of some of these companies, and I think what you're doing is an interesting spin, talking about how you're in a way reviving or giving some of these companies a new life, or some of the products a new life. But first, I'm just curious, like, give me a little idea of like your background, like how you, I guess maybe your introduction to the outdoors. We're going to take a few steps back, but
Okay, well, we can definitely go way back if you want,
yeah, let's
because
go way back.
a lot of my inspiration is definitely from being a kid in the outdoors. I grew up in Lake Tahoe. That's kind of where my parents ended up. They both were traveling ice skaters, so they were on
Hmm.
like Disney on Ice and Ice Capades, and they ended up having me, the second child, Chris, the first child, Johann, uh, from an Austrian father. That's why his name is Johann. Um, and they were just kind of sick of being on the road, traveling around with the second kid. So luckily, they were able to kind of set up shop in Lake Tahoe in the 80s, early 80s. I think it was around 82 or 83, right before I was born. And then I lived in Lake Tahoe from when I was born till 18, till I went to college in Reno. Went to a first degree in Truckee Meadows. It's kind of a community college out in Reno, Nevada. And then I moved out here to Portland to get a bachelor's in graphic design, graphic communications, and stuff. So growing up in Tahoe is just a lot of snowboarding, different types of snowboarding, backcountry snowboarding, resort snowboarding, and I think a lot of inspiration to make and do what I do comes from like the counterculture of snowboarding back in the day, which is, I think it's still kind of going strong now, but snowboarding's huge now. It's not as small as when it was first developing in the early 80s and mid 80s is when I found like most of my inspiration from like the charismatic people doing it, like Jamie Lynn, Craig Kelly, Jeff Brushy, like all these pro snowboarders. Like for me as a child, I looked at them as like kind of rock stars, and I think the little groups around where I live, like the little kind of cliques or crews of snowboarders and skaters, it's like they all had this kind of passion to make things for themselves, like make their own clothes, come up with their like a crew name and have their own stickers and all of that. I was totally driven by like the graphics behind that, the art behind that, like the graphics on snowboards, the like how the outerwear was built and what it looked like. I loved it all. It was kind of, where most of my inspiration came from. So that's kind of how I got into design. Like at first, I just wanted to be like a snow skate artist. I just wanted to do illustrations for the industry, and went to college thinking like do in my portfolio just looked like a piece of fine art. And I was even told that in critique, like, you're just making fine art, you're not making, this isn't design. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is totally design. But I soon learned that like design was much broader than what I was focusing on. And now I'm like working as a creative director in a small studio here in Portland, and kind of delving into uh, almost every aspect of design, from product to just standard layout design, web development, like marketing. And it's definitely a busy thing, but at times it's takes me away from that original kind of inspiration. And that's where like sand brings me back to almost like that passion, that drive to have something that's kind of my own outside of like the everyday workday stuff.
Well, I think for a lot of people who grow up playing outside, spending time, in these outdoor activities, I don't think you ever think this is an industry that I could work in. Like I could make
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
and I think when people have that realization, sometimes that can be a game changer. It's like, oh, you mean people make this stuff that I'm using? People make
yeah,
these
oh yeah,
snowboards, like people make these jackets, like that's a job. And I think it seems like a lot of product designers kind of have that realization, or they end up finding themselves falling into the industry. There's like never really a clear path into it,
yeah,
which I think is what we're trying to create with our program here at the university, is create more of a clear path for people to do that. But that seems like a common experience, right? It's like this realization. It's like, oh, I could be making the stuff that I love to use. Did you have one of those moments, or I guess
uh,
when you were snowboarding, did you ever think I want to work in this industry? Like I would love to be in the outdoor space.
oh yeah. The whole time I knew I wanted to either be a professional snowboarder, and further along when I got a bit older and was injured a few times, I started looking into the other side of it. Is like, can I make art for snow or skate? Which that never happened, but still I followed that design path, and I'm definitely working with clients and brands that I think is just as fulfilling as if I ended up, doing illustrations for a snow skate company. But I've had those aha moments, like definitely uh, more than once. In snowboarding, there was a few smaller brands going on at the time. I think one was like Bob Snowboards, and the bottom graphics had like kind of like a gas station patch on them that said Bob.
Hmm.
And I realized some of these smaller snowboard brands, people were actually like just in their garage, like making the boards and cutting the boards. And there was a lot of these smaller, like Yellow Bus, I think was one. I don't know if these, like, I don't know the history, but there was definitely a few do it yourself, like snowboard brands out there where I was like, oh man, you can definitely do this yourself for sure. And then later on, like I got into trying to like put my own music and art out there through web design when it was first developing. So I started doing web design, and I didn't even know you could do that. So that was like an aha moment. You can just, I don't know. Once you find out you can make something on your own, I think that is just so special. And why, like, right now I'm battling whether I want to like manufacture stuff. Like part of the process and the magic in it all is like, for me, is a little bit lost by losing the part of it where you're like building it yourself and cutting up the material yourself. And I know it's like not viable as a business option to be like building all your own packs and trying to like survive. But for me, it's not really kind of about that. It's more of a passion project. So luckily I don't have to focus on like making money doing it.
Right. Definitely helps when you feel, I imagine you feel challenged by the project, you feel fulfilled by it, and that fulfillment comes, whether there's a paycheck coming or not, right?
Yeah, for sure.
With that said, I guess walk me through like the origins of sand. Where is this an idea that you had incubating for a while? You mentioned that you've been doing this for about 5 years. um
Yeah.
what, where did this initial idea come from, and what did you want sand to be? There's tons of people out there making product, right?
Yeah.
But I've noticed something very different about what you're creating, or at least there's a different feeling to it. So what did you want to create? What went into into that process?
I met a few good friends, like going to the school in Portland here, the Art Institute. I think like a lot of inspiration came from actually putting myself back into school and getting like furthering my education in design. So I met some good friends, and one of those good friends, like we wanted to have an outlet outside of our day jobs after, we both graduated, and we started Sand thinking it would be like just like this mini screen printing t-shirt brand. Like, you've heard this story time and time again. Like, we want to do something cool with screen prints and t-shirts. And so we started getting into just like doing the design process together, working collaboratively, like in Adobe Illustrator, and coming up with like a series of designs we would do on shirts. And we had a website, and we sold, shirts here and there. We did a few pop-up shops, but the original idea was like, so we have Sand as a cult is the web address, and our original idea was like sand is like the oldest thing. It's like the oldest rock. It's withered down to like a mini stone or a pebble. And we were just thinking around like doing this thing about fake religious cults. Like, how could we recruit someone into a religious cult and have them think it's a cult, but then turn it into something else? Like now it's you've been recruited to buy some product. Now it's I don't know. And then I got into sewing just because I think initially I bought an industrial machine about 6 years ago. I've always been into sewing. It's just been one of those like pathways I've reached time and time again. But I got pretty injured, like my back. I got a herniated disc, and my main like thing at the time was like running. So I definitely had to do something to replace that. So I learned how to use an industrial machine, and also started to find so much inspiration online, like through Instagram, one, but like also there's so many people doing this. Like there's bike pack makers, there's every pack you can think of. There's someone doing it themselves out there. So I'm definitely not special at all. So I'm like leaking into other topics in this interview, but
Well,
yeah. So Sand, like,
I'm curious. Like, I feel like, I mean, in that way, it's kind of a similar story around textiles and pack making that I think is really interesting. And for those who have listened to previous episodes, right? Like Jameis, his story with Greater Goods, like, someone who's just curious about learning how to work with different materials in design, like challenging himself to buy a sewing machine and learn how to sew, right? Like for his New Year's resolution, and now he's making one-off designs that are incredible, and he's really taken off. It to me, it sounds like it's kind of it's an interesting medium, I guess, is the point, right? It's like sewing, I think, is and making things out of textiles is really interesting, because there's a relatively low barrier to entry. Obviously, the pattern making can get really complicated, but a lot of people can feed fabric through a sewing machine, right? Like a
yeah.
lot of people can do that. Now there's different levels, right, to what you can create, but do you feel like that kind of opened up a whole another medium for you to be able to sew?
I think so. I think sewing is kind of special because you're dealing with every part of design, but you're dealing with it like in a tactile way. You're touching everything, and color is real. It's not on a screen. It's like something you can like, you go to a fabric store, you can look through patterns and feel the material and what it's like. And I think it's also like you're cutting, and you're like, it's like art. You're cutting and pasting and playing with different things and seeing if they fit together. And also like when you incorporate a knowledge of like how to use a certain material for function, like it ups the level. And that's kind of my education in the last few years has been like oh wow, like okay, I've got like a hardcore industrial sewing machine. I'm starting to use materials I've never used before and learn about materials and what their function is. And I just had such a love early on. I mean, I still do, but for Cordura was just like special to me. I was like, oh, dude, like even like looking at the old Topo Designs packs, I just think a very simple Cordura pack is still super valuable. Like, I don't know. I play a lot of role. I place a lot of value in the role of aesthetics in my work. And I think if you, there's a lot of people who focus highly on function. Um, whereas like, I don't know, sometimes I think a little bit of that is BS. I think a simple item that works for you, you know, like why everyone likes totes. It's like a bag with a big pocket and you can just throw all your shit in it. And like everyone loves the totes. Like I can just do totes forever, tote bags, tote bags, tote bags. But I don't know. I'm trying to like keep everything pretty simple, and I just like that the end product is this thing you can kind of hold. And I mean, I'm the same way with information. I'd rather hold the book and touch the pages, and I'd rather, I don't know, touch a record. It's a weird nostalgia, I know, like when we're supposed to be embracing technology, but for
One where
me,
your full-time work is so digital, right?
yeah, maybe it's just my like outlet or break from my job, you know, like this is my other way I can get my kicks or whatever.
Well, when did you feel like that the brand really came into its own, and what did you want it to? I mean, you talked a little bit about the meaning of sand, right? But I guess what did you want it to mean for people, and when do you think that that kind of started to formulate itself?
Jeez, I don't know. It was super organic. Like at first I just wanted to like put out simple items that were durable and that had a lot of aesthetic value, and part of that was like mirroring other brands that were doing that I looked up to, like definitely Topo Designs is one of them. But I don't know, I think I don't really think about it that much, you know, like where sand will go. It's sometimes just, it's weird who latches on to certain things, like kind of odd in Instagram culture, how people will like kind of grasp onto one thing you're doing and think you kind of embody that when you could embody something totally different.
Well, this it's a conversation that I've had with other people like Nicole McLaughlin, about upcycling and how she uses brand a lot, like upcycling a lot of brands products into new items, and how she started to move away from upcycling brands, and now she's upcycling with food and other materials and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And we kind of had an interesting conversation. I'd love your thoughts, like on just the power of brand, right? It seems like um I don't, we all want to find something unique or something that represents us or communicates the way we feel or our values. Like that's one of those things about apparel or gear, something that we wear and use, right? It's like says something about us. So it's kind of interesting to hear from your perspective, right? It's like this is an evolving thing, but people associate some kind of value with it.
Yeah,
And it's not like a top down, this is what our values are, this is what we want you to feel. It's people are assigning that value to it.
yeah,
Um, which is really interesting, and just kind of this dynamic of brand, and people wanting something that's entirely unique and entirely their own, but they also want to associate themselves with recognized brands because of maybe the values or the status that those provide them. I don't know, where do you see yourself falling um, along that spectrum?
um she's awesome, by the way, Nicole, right?
Yeah,
uh
yeah,
She's just next level though with it. I don't know if I can start taking banana peels and like sewing a pack out of it.
yeah.
It's just crazy what she's doing. I like
Yeah.
her thought process and I love her feed. It's just amazing work. Um, I think association with brand, I know like with your Jameis interview, he was taking North Face and Patagonian, and I'd say he was using it in a really tasteful way to maybe up the value of his brand, because I think a lot of people will see a North Face kind of woven label and be like, oh my God, it's you're doing something totally new with it, but they still associate it with the original brand North Face. Whereas like recently with the Frostline kits bags, I'm doing the same thing. I'm making sure like I'm taking the original label and using it, but no one knows what Frostline kits is. And like, I guess the Burton project is a little more similar to what Jameis was doing with North Face, because everyone kind of knows what Burton is, or Burton snowboards. Um, but I think there's something special about the original like history of it all. And if I weren't to incorporate like the woven label of a certain brand in a piece, I think it would lose a lot of its, you know, special value to someone outside looking at it. Um, yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like using brand is a powerful way to bring people into the conversation, right? And then you're able to challenge them with kind of your take, right? It's like upcycling a Burton product, right? People are going to recognize that brand and have certain
Yeah.
feelings about it, but to be able to put your own spin on it and rethink it is really interesting. I don't know. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about um, kind of your interest in history, and then we can talk a little bit about the projects that you've been working on, especially recently, and how you've been incorporating the history of some of these brands. When did you really start to pay attention or start to dig into the history of some of these brands? Because you've been doing this with Patagonia catalogs. Was
Yeah,
that
it's
part of
actually
this project, or was that was before you started the kind of the formal cut and what's the name of the project called?
cut and play
Cut and
is what
play,
I
right?
kind of just started the last couple months. That inspiration was really sort of like part of that was your outdoor archive, like, and you know, some of the interviews you had on your podcast. But before that, I had started a project that uses, I wouldn't call it upcycling. It's actually, you're still using new materials, but I started collecting Patagonia catalogs and doing collages out of them, like on paper, and then sending like a really high res photo of those to get printed on Dyneema fabric.
Mm.
So I started using those like graphics or collages on like a outdoor wallet series. Um, so I think it was like almost like the first inkling of an idea or a seed of an idea where like this next part of it is actually taking the original pieces and doing real upcycling, not just like the idea is still there. It's still, to me, it's like, it's great that I'm trying to use all the old materials in my studio, but also it's a totally different problem to solve than you know, coming up with a design made from all new materials, because they're just flat sheets of fabric, you know. Whereas like when you're cutting up a pair of pants or something like that, you really have to think about where the seams land, and you could end up with just a mess if you don't, you know, think through it and cut it up in the right places. And so, uh, yeah, I don't know. I hope it. Right now, I think the future of where this is going is me learning a lot more about brands I've never even like heard of before, and hopefully, you know, I can in the process teach people that they can also do this, and they can also learn about like historical brands that have been sort of, I mean, you deal with it every day, like history gets lost if it's not like kind of rekindled.
Right. Well, and I think that's where I was initially attracted to what you were doing. I think you followed our outdoor archive Instagram, and I just saw this Patagonia project, and I thought that I've never seen anyone who's taking, you know, old Patagonia catalogs and translating that old you know, art, you know, the text into a new product, right? I just thought that was such an interesting take, because one of the things that we talk about as an archive is um, a lot of these materials we're saving people's junk mail, right? But as a designer, I think you have an appreciation of um, you know, some of these catalogs are just ordinary. It's something that would show up in your mailbox, and you'd flip through, and you know, maybe you'd toss it, maybe it would sit around the house for a while and collect dust, and then you'd get rid of it. But I think that's you're taking the ordinary, right, and imprinting it on a product and giving it some kind of a new life, even if you're not directly upcycling the paper itself, but in a way you're continuing the life of that product in a different way, or at least continuing the story, which I thought was really interesting. Giving people just a small window into the history of a brand, um, and paying homage to them in a way. I thought that was really interesting, and an interesting evolution of this conversation where we're talking so much about documenting, preserving the history of the industry, but there's so much on the other side of that spectrum. It's like, what do you do with that history? Like, what could be done to um, take some of these brands that are that have trademarks that are still floating out there in the world, right? Like, some of these brands have come and gone, but the trademarks are available. And recently we've seen a couple companies have started back up to revive some of these brands. Whole Bar is one.
Yeah.
In the last, I think, 10 years or so, a group out of Italy went and got the trademark for Whole Bar, this brand that started in the late 40s, early 50s, one of the core outdoor brands, and they've revived it. And I see a huge potential for that, right? It's like
Yeah.
leveraging this history and heritage that the outdoor industry has. There's no shortage of some of these small brands that have come and gone. So I'm really interested to see what are people going to do with the knowledge of these brands that maybe they had never heard of before. A couple that we mentioned off air, right? Rivendell, Mountain
Yeah.
Works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple others, Moonstone, Down Home. There's a few of these companies that you've never heard of before, but you dig into the history, and they're really interesting stories. And we talked a little bit again off air, like, history is written by the winners, right? But that's not to say that a lot of these brands that have come and gone don't have meaningful stories to tell. And that's where I thought the Frostline project was really interesting. A company that I wasn't familiar with, maybe 2 years ago, um, but recent, got to know the brand, got to talk to people associated with the company, really get to understand how big this company got. It was a massive company
Hmm.
selling kits all over the country, and the kit business was huge, right? Selling these pattern pieces, and then you would sew up your own parka or your own down vest, and the down, right? You probably have some of the down chambers, right?
I
The
do.
the down that you'd put into the chambers. And um, it's interesting that some of this history, it can just disappear, right? And so I think what you're doing with the Frostline project is really interesting, because I imagine quite a few of your followers um, probably are going to go to Bruce Johnson's History of Gear website to read about Frostline,
I hope so.
right? I mean, that's is
That's the
that part of the
point.
goal? Is that part of the goal, is to shed some light on some of these brands that maybe you've fallen in love with as you've discovered them and learned about them? Um, is that part of the motivation?
I think that's like a huge part of the motivation. I found so much like inspiration, specifically. I mean, I just started this series, but I'm hoping to build many, many pieces out of it. And they're not all going to be tote bags. Some will be backpacks. Some will be, I mean, the first piece was kind of a pair of shorts. But I think like with Frostline, I also relate to some of the brands in the 60s and 70s because just the way they were making stuff like is a lot like the way I'm making stuff in my room. And I relate to that. Like I relate to not, I don't know. I don't want to get big. I don't want to manufacture things. So like part of me like has that nostalgia to kind of research how they used to do it and almost do it the same way, or like, I don't know, I get a kick out of that. So if that's part of my process, I'd love to like share these brands and have people learn like also. And if I can keep doing that, like that's more of the value in it than even like getting people to recognize sand. Like I don't really care. Sand is my thing that I like have fun with. So like if people like it, they can like it. And I definitely know you'll do something weird and like your Instagram audience will be like, what the heck are you doing? You gotta keep like selling this or that. And my website's been sold out for 2 months, and it's because it's not my job. Like I'm doing this to like, I don't know if it's selfish, but also trying to show that there's value in things other than like buying something, you know?
Mm. Yeah, that's, I mean, so much of the industry is driven, well, the industry is driven by that, right? And that an industry that is all about getting people outside and enjoying the natural world also finds itself in this conundrum, right? Of, well, we got to sell more stuff to help people get outside. Right. And that's something that our students face all the time. It's like, I want to be
Yeah,
a part of this industry, but do I really want to make more stuff? And so they go
yeah.
through a little crisis of, how do I make more stuff that matters? Right. How do
Mhm.
I be a part of the solution rather than just make more stuff with, a different colorway or a zipper that's here or there, or, slightly different features. So it's interesting to hear, your perspective on that. You have any more thoughts on that? Just about it, you don't seem driven to make more stuff just to make more stuff.
No, I think like there's got to be an idea there and like a story. And if there's not a story or an idea there, like I don't want to just put like products on my website and sell them. I want to like create almost like an experience out of every project, and hopefully like through video and photography and like these little historical collages, like people will feel something a little different than the I mean, I may sell stuff in the future that has to do with this, but it's definitely not my motivation. And like with what Jameis did with Greater Goods, right?
Hmm.
With Arc'teryx is like that's an awesome way to expand the idea. You've got a brand that's fully established in the outdoor technical industry, and they're seeing value in someone and using almost like their vision to, get into like a process of upcycling. And I don't know, like I think that's a great way to get out there. Is not like if your original motivation is just to sell things and you're trying to like appeal to other people, like I just don't know if there's much story there. Like I feel like you have to build the story and the value before you try to grow as a brand. And for me, like I definitely like within the last 5 years battled wanting to manufacture things and knowing a little bit about it, and knowing how to source from other countries. And every time I get down that road a little bit, I just am like, this is not why I'm doing this. Like I can just work at my day job to do this type of stuff. Like, yeah.
Well, what are you looking forward to in the future? I know you kind of mentioned sand as just evolves, right? But you've got to have some ideas for future projects, or at least companies that are intriguing. Maybe that's a path we can go down. What are some of the companies in the archive, or maybe outside the archive, that have really piqued your interest, or stories that you want to dive into more? And I know you've got maybe another Frostline project in you. And there's plenty of Frostline kits floating around on eBay. You can buy those
There
all day
is.
long. So
Oh,
there's a lot
I
of those to
found
work
that.
with. But um, what are some of the other companies that have really jumped out at you?
Well, Frostline, I'm doing one more Frostline piece. I found like you said, there's a lot of Frostline on eBay, and that's kind of where I've been getting most of my stuff right now. I mean, I'd love to go junking somewhere in Boulder, Colorado. If I ever get there, I'm sure there's some awesome like stores to go through. But right now, it's been basically eBay. So I have a mountain parka from Frostline that is like kind of like a slate blue color, and it's got some cool pockets on it. I'm gonna turn that into something. I think I'm gonna like bleach dye it, and then after bleaching it, I'm gonna do kind of an indigo dye process and try to turn it into something else, but still keep that Frostline label on it.
Hmm.
So I'm excited. I actually later today was gonna bleach the jacket and see what happens. Sometimes bleaching is weird. Like you'll get something that turns orange, like all of
Hmm.
a sudden. I think that usually happens when you start with black, it turns orange, and I don't want that to happen. So um, but like I learned about class 5 a little bit from you guys, and Bruce Johnson's kind of archive. I kind of want to do something with old Sierra design packs, but they're really expensive. They're kind of collector's items.
Hmm.
So I don't know like if I'm willing to spend like $130 for the teardrop pack,
Yeah.
from Sierra Design. So I don't know. I don't have a long list. It's kind of as I learn about new brands from back in the day, something sparks an interest in it, and I'll delve more into it. I'd like to. Originally, this started by only wanting to do old snowboard brands and focus on snowboard outerwear. So I have some Wave Rave pieces. If you've ever heard of them, back in the day, Wave Rave was like a big outerwear um, kind of company. Uh, what else? I found some old Moro pants.
Mm.
Um, Moro Snowboards was also one of the originals, like Moro, Kemper, Burton. Um, I'm trying to think what I have around here. Yeah, so like mostly snowboarding, but yeah, I'm definitely delving into different outdoor brands and companies and just trying to learn along the way. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I have the next two projects planned, and then the rest will happen, I think, organically, or what I learned from the next one will lead into to what I find interest in future iterations.
Right. Well, there's no shortage of companies to dive into. That's what I'm learning is
Yeah.
the more I look into the history of the industry, the more I find some, niche regional outdoor brand that has a whole history for itself. So yeah, the digger that I deep, the more overwhelmed, but also excited that I get at the prospect of the work that we're doing. So um, I don't know. Have you seen anyone else who's doing anything? Maybe not a direct, super similar to what you're doing, but do you see anyone else who's out there appreciating the work and trying to, I guess, honor the history of these companies, introduce people to these brands, kind of in a way like what you're doing? Or is there anyone else that you're aware of?
Uh, Not really. I mean, on the upcycling side, I think like we talked about Jameis with Greater Goods or Greater Goods, right? Sorry, I hope I'm getting his name right every time I say that. He's not exactly taking these like historical brands, but I think almost like this collab culture that's going on is kind of reviving maybe brands that don't have such a limelight. Whereas like Topo is good with collabs, and um, they'll sometimes take. That's kind of all I can really relate. I haven't seen people really take an old brand that doesn't still exist and turn it into something new. I know a lot of people are using like old North Face pieces or Patagonia pieces, but they're brands that still are around. So maybe not, no, but I'm sure I'll find other people doing the same thing. There's always, you'll be, you're always surprised when you find someone doing the exact same thing as you. As you're like, oh, I thought I was special, but I'm not.
Right. Well, that's been the response that we've gotten. Not, I still feel like we're special, and what you're doing is special too. But it's good to kind of fall into a community, which I think we're starting to develop in a way. I mean, that was kind of the goal behind the podcast was, I mean, there's kind of all these disparate groups of people who are passionate about the history of this industry. Is there a way to at least start documenting stories about these people and their connection to these brands? And well, that was kind of the motivation behind the podcast and the archive as well. It's like let's start celebrating the history of some of these companies and try to bring more people into the community if we can. So
Yeah.
um I mean, that's what's been fun is stumbling across. I mean, there's a guy in Australia that runs a website similar to Bruce Johnson's. That's, I mean, he's just documenting the history of the industry, and he's got a timeline of firsts. Right? It's like here's all the firsts in the industry. It's like new product innovations, and like there's kind of this disparate groups of people who have this passion and love for these outdoor brands, and they're kind of doing all their own archival work. You're doing that archival work in your own way. So I think it's helpful that we can find each other so we know that we're not crazy. It's
Yeah.
nice to know that there's other, well, I guess there's other crazy people out there who are passionate about these old brands as well. So that's been the fun part for me.
Yeah. for sure. Like we're doing our own sorts of preservation of these brands, and I think we're both doing it in valuable ways for other people to look at and learn. Um, but yeah, gosh, just having, I think the model of having something to start with is huge. Whereas like a regular design process from new materials, like there's nothing there to begin with. Whereas like when you're taking something that exists already, it's like you have a piece of clay already that has some sort of image built into it and like memory built into it, and it's fun to like have a starting point. And it's also like it's easier in a way, and it's harder in the way that you have to get creative with constructing these new products out of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's some built-in constraints there, which it sounds like you embrace. Um,
Yeah, I
I
love
don't know,
it.
when you're kind of tackling a project like this and you lay out all the pattern pieces for a frost line kit,
Yeah.
is it like you said, kind of you see the statue and the marble, or like what how do you get your idea for what this thing is going to become?
I think first, like when I'm looking at the pieces online, I'll definitely look at color. And for me, pockets are huge. Like the design of the original piece kind of has to look like something I was either once interested in. Like with the Burton pieces, I'd probably never wear an old pair of like lavender Burton snowboard pants right now. But at one time when I was a kid, those are the pants I wanted, and I wanted them really bad. So that's part of the story, is like I'm bringing that memory into a current product, and I'm like trying to tell that original story and that original feeling I had that made me so inspired. Um, but like with Frostline, when I lay it out on a table, like I got an original Frostline kit recently and opened up the box, and it was like half made. Someone had tried to sew the parka together, and it felt like they just gave up. So with that one, they got the pockets done. So I'm like, all right, I'll use the pockets. They did a pretty good job on the pockets. I'll keep them as is. And sometimes like when a piece is fully constructed, I'll just cut it up and patch it back together in a different way. So like almost like a patchwork method, where if you don't have many full kind of, you don't have the real estate on some of the material, you can just take all the mini pieces you can find off of it and sew it into a big kind of a big sheet. um, but pockets is huge. I'll usually use the original pocket. With this last piece with Frostline, the rust tote bag, I actually took a pair of Bonfire snowboard pants too, and I created the product, the pockets on my own from that. But then I used the down vest um, in ways I could manage with it. A lot of the seams with down, like connecting together, like it gets pretty thick, and when you're also adding like 1,000D Cordura, like my binder won't go through multiple like
Hmm.
pieces of fabric like that. So I'm thinking like of construction. I'm also thinking about like color, the original like design. I guess there's a few different factors that kind of set the pace of a. But no, it's not like I most of the time for these pieces, like the upcycled ones, I won't like draw out a design first. With all my newer stuff, like I'd get on my iPad and kind of go through a few iterations before trying to like sew something. But with these, I think the fun part is like just going right into it and like kind of creating a pattern, but it's like a very almost like skeleton pattern that I can use to like almost like trace pieces on the original with. And I even cut up the pattern if I have to like create something else out of the original piece. So I guess that's sort of sort of how I deal with it.
Well, so I maybe kind of as a, I don't know, kind of wrap up the conversation in a way, but what would you recommend, or some parting thoughts for people who, I guess, quit before they're ahead, right? I respect what what you've done, what Jameis has done, what Nicole has done. Um, like just your ability to push through and learn a skill, like push yourself to learn how to sew, or even if you don't know how to sew, you still can create, right? That was a big lesson for me from Nicole, is a lot of her work is, or at least in the past, was a hot glue gun and scissors, right? It's like
Yeah.
cobbling stuff together. How important for you is just starting? And what would you say to people who are kind of holding themselves back from just creating?
Yeah, that definitely, you can just get stopped in your tracks thinking of an idea and never like executing it. I'd say like one of my like early inspirations when I got into pack making was this dude on Instagram. His name's James, but his handle is Rucksack Village. He said, "Don't be too precious with it. Like, make mistakes and make a ton of them." So that same like mindset kind of goes into starting an idea and just putting it into action. Like, you have to start somewhere, and sometimes like the idea develops within the process. It doesn't develop on a notepad or anything like that, and sometimes it doesn't develop in a sketch. It develops through making mistakes, and like,
Well, and it doesn't seem like you're ever going to make anything new or interesting if you're playing it safe, right? It's like
yeah,
no
for
one
sure.
else that I'm aware of has taken a transfer print of catalogs and put that on a product, right? It's a
Yeah.
really interesting idea that I haven't seen done, right? And I don't know how much you knew about, how to go through that process, but there's probably a few things that you had to brush up on and learn how to do that. And it's kind of the same with anything that's new, right? It's like you're going to have to go through a little bit of a growth curve and put in a
Yeah,
little extra time doing your homework of how you're going to execute something, or but the reward is there, right? There's an opportunity there.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, with that, if anyone is interested, I might as well like tell them how they can do it. If you want to print your art on good outdoor materials like Dyneema composite, Ripstop by the Roll does it, and it's relatively inexpensive. If you want to just test out the process, it's definitely fun.
Right. No, it sounds awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. I guess with that said, how do people stay in touch with you? How's the best way to connect with you? I know Instagram's big. That's where we connected, but
Yeah. Instagram, you can email me at Christopher@santasoccult.com or info@santasoccult.com. But I'll usually like reply on Instagram. If I feel like I can say I can do something, I'll reply. I get a lot of like, when is your website going to not be all sold out again?
yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can't answer that one anymore. I'm sorry. I'm just working on other things. But yeah, Instagram, if you want to hit me up, go for it. I'm down to have a conversation, or either like, I'd love to, if you have questions about materials or learning about a certain process, that's, I love that. I'd love to teach people.
Well, that's great. Well, Chris, I think we'll wrap it up here. We could easily do another conversation in the future, but we'll wrap it here. I appreciate you taking time, and glad that you reached out initially and found the archive. It's amazing to see what you're working on. Can't wait to see what future projects are coming.
Thank you. It's been awesome to talk to you. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. You're probably going to be a constant inspiration for me with the future work I'm doing. So thanks a lot, Chase.